Right now, you think you know what Earth looks like. You've seen the photos. You've seen the blue marble floating in black space 1,000 times on posters, on screensavers, in documentaries. But a small number of humans have seen it with their own eyes, from far enough away to hold the whole thing in a single glance. And almost every single one of them came back a different person. This is the story of what happens to a human mind the moment it truly understands how small its entire world actually is. It has a name. Psychologists call it the overview effect, a term coined by writer Frank White in 1987 after he began interviewing astronauts about what they experience looking back at Earth from orbit or from the surface of the moon. He wasn't asking about the view, he was asking what it did to them afterward. The answers were strikingly consistent. Astronauts described a sudden, overwhelming sense that national borders, political conflicts, the daily arguments and anxieties of life on the surface, all of it suddenly looked absurd. Not from a place of judgment, from a place of scale. You cannot see a border from orbit. There is no line in the dirt separating one country from another. There is just one continuous surface, wrapped in a thin, fragile layer of blue and white, hanging in an ocean of absolute black. Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell described the experience as instant global consciousness, a feeling that stayed with him permanently after he returned. He later said something odd happened to him on that flight home. He began to feel a profound connection to everyone and everything he could see, as if separateness itself, the sense that you are one isolated person surrounded by other isolated people, was something closer to an illusion than a fact. Here's where it gets stranger. This isn't just a poetic reaction. Researchers who later studied astronaut accounts systematically found a genuine, measurable shift in how these individuals related to other people afterward. Many astronauts described a lasting increase in empathy, a reduced tolerance for conflict, and a deep, sometimes disorienting grief over how casually humanity treats the only planet it has. Some described crying uncontrollably during their first view of Earth, without expecting to, without being able to explain exactly why. Why would a visual experience produce a psychological shift this deep? Neuroscientists and philosophers who've studied the overview effect point to something called cognitive scale mismatch. Your brain, for its entire evolutionary history, was never built to process the true size of the planet you live on. It was built to process a village, a valley, a coastline, a horizon. Your ancestors' entire concept of everything that exists was, for nearly all of human history, a walkable radius of a few dozen miles. Distance beyond that wasn't abstractly understood. It simply didn't register as real. So when an astronaut looks out a window and sees the entire curve of the Earth at once, their brain is being handed information it has no evolutionary template for. There is no ancestral experience of seeing your whole home in one glance. The nearest emotional analogy your mind can reach for is something closer to birth or death or the sudden collapse of a boundary you didn't know you had. Some researchers describe it less as a visual experience and more as an existential one, an abrupt and total reordering of what counts as close and what counts as far. This connects to a much older debate in psychology about how humans construct their sense of identity. Cognitive scientist and philosopher Thomas Metzinger has argued that the self is, in a very real sense, a model your brain constructs, not a fixed, discoverable thing. Under ordinary circumstances, that model draws its boundary at your skin, at your immediate surroundings, at the people you know personally. The overview effect appears to briefly dissolve part of that boundary. If your brain's model of self can be redrawn at a larger scale, even temporarily, when handed the right visual information, it raises an uncomfortable question about how fixed your sense of identity actually is the rest of the time. Astronaut Ron Garan described coming back from the International Space Station with what he called an unshakable understanding that humanity is one single organism, temporarily divided by borders that exist only on paper. He wasn't speaking metaphorically when he said it. He described it as the most concrete, obvious fact he had ever directly perceived, more real to him than the country listed on his own passport. None of this means Earth's problems, its conflicts, its divisions, are imaginary. They have very real consequences for the people living inside them. But the overview effect suggests something unsettling about perspective itself. the line between us and them, the borders you were taught mattered enormously, might be, in a very literal sense,